The first gate coughed him in with a hydraulic sigh, steel on steel biting down behind his heels. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, thin, insect-sounding, a nest of white light that flattened faces and polished sweat. The intake hall smelled like bleach poured over old copper. Everything shone except the men. Darren kept his hands loose at his sides, fingers uncurled, knuckles unannounced. His steps were measured on the painted line, heel then ball, a quiet metronome. The floor was epoxy, scuffed where carts turned and chains snagged. A red diode blinked from the camera dome in the corner. Blink. Pause. Blink. The rhythm checked his own. A sliding wicket opened with a thunk. A CO behind the glass didn't look up from a clipboard. Last name, Thorne. The pen paused mid-scratch. Eyes flicked to his face and away. Filing him under same. Another. Next. The CO slid a tray through the slot. Clear bag. Orange slip. Cheap comb. A bar of soap wrapped in paper that looked greasier than the soap. Shoes off. Belt. Anything metal. The CO's voice traveled like a tape measure snapping back. He complied piece by piece. Movements neat. Minimal nuance. The belt buckle kissed plastic. The shoes went heel to toe in the tray. Tongues out. The arch of the metal detector loomed, chalky from countless palms. He waited for the nod. Through. Another CO barked from the side. A man with a jaw like a brick and a wedding ring that looked too bright for this light. Darren went through. The detector answered with a sulky beep. He lifted his arms. The wand whispered along his ribs, across the seam where shoulder met chest, circled his wrists like curious birds. When it reached his left ankle, it chirped. The CO knocked at the cuff. Steel eyelets. He said to no one. To the room. To the paperwork already waiting to be filed. It's the eyelets. He's fine. He moved on. Along the wall, a bench of men watched, some bored, some with that lazy smile that isn't a smile. Their cuffs clicked when they shifted. An accidental chorus. Behind Darren, the door shut again and sealed the hall into its own weather. Hum. Bleach. Breath. A guard at the end of the line rolled ink between rubber and glass. Hands, he said, not looking up. Darren gave him hands. Fingers spread, placed, rolled. The ink was cold, sticky as if it wanted to keep him. The guard pressed each finger into a rectangle on a sheet that would smell like a filing cabinet even after it dried. Quiet means order, the guard said, almost gentle, as if he'd said it 1,000 times and it kept him whole. Don't mistake it for peace. Darren's gaze found the source of the hum again. Then the red blink. He matched their tempos and filed them away with the smell, the angles, the faces. His eyes weren't restless. They were patient. They took and did not give. The hall opened into a cage corridor. The mesh had a grubby shine, as if hands polished it without wanting to. A CO keyed open the next door and stepped aside without looking at him. A practiced subtraction. Follow the line. Stand on the yellow tape at the X. The CO said, wait to be called. He followed. He stood. Yellow tape laid an X like a warning sign under his boots. Here, not there. Through the next window, another clerk sorted fabric, like he was changing seasons. Gray shirts, darker gray pants, socks that had long severed relations with elastic. Name, the clerk said, Thorne. Size. Darren looked down at himself briefly, not in doubt but in courtesy to the question. Medium shirt, 32 waist. The clerk eyeballed him, decided the math could hold, tossed items onto the counter. The fabric wanted to be something else. Sailcloth, tarp, anything but clothing. Behind him, the corridor coughed up more bodies. They drifted into place like pieces of metal falling into a mold. Voices carried low and flat. A laugh somewhere was too loud. A note sung wrong in this room, and cut off with a throat clear. He dressed quickly, folds crisp by habit. He smoothed the hem once, a line straight as thought. The soap went into the clear bag. The comb slipped beside it. He looped the laces, pulled them just enough to be true, not enough to betray haste. Thorne, a voice called from down the line. Another brick job but thinner, pointed his baton without malice. Just geography, processing. Move. He moved. The walls here were closer, layered with flaking paint like rings on a tree, each coat an era of trouble. As he passed an open gate, a draft slipped through, carrying a smell of wet concrete and something fried once and long ago. At the next station, an older CO with a face carved into patience looked him over like a mechanic listens to an engine. "You been through intake before," the man said, not as accusation, not as kindness. "You walk like someone who's seen the inside." "You think so?" The CO's mouth made a shape that wasn't quite a smile. He stamped a form with a noise that sounded official and bored at once. "Don't be clever," he said, and slid the paper into a tray. Clever gets mistaken for disrespect. Darren inclined his head as if receiving a weather report. Water gathers in low places. Time chooses its own pace. They moved again, bodies funneling into a wider space, where the ceiling rose and the light changed from sterile white to sodium amber. A shadow larger than its owner peeled off from a cluster near a support column. Art on flesh, ink crawling up a neck and vanishing under a collar. Razer. He didn't wear the name, the room wore it for him. People's eyes made lanes around him. He had height, but it wasn't the height that mattered. It was the deployment of it. He leaned like a man accustomed to being leaned toward. Rings of old bruises haloed his knuckles, faint as memories that might be bragged about. He saw Darren like a cat notices a window crack in winter. His head tilted. A small interest. He tapped 2 fingers against the column. Twice. The men near him heard a bell rung for them alone. One peeled away on his left, another on his right. A third seemed into the background, until he wasn't background at all. "New meat," Razer said, not loud. The word traveled anyway, fresh off the bus. The men near him gave back the echo that a line requires. Fresh. Meat. Bus. The syllables made a rope. Darren stopped where the tape told him to stop. He stayed in profile to the camera and the men and the next door, giving all 3 the same amount of him. His breathing was even enough to be a lie detector. "What's your name?" Razer said, as if the question had not already been asked and answered by the prison itself, and filed, and stamped, and copied. "We like names. Names show manners." "Thorne. Just Thorne." Razer smiled, as if the thing to smile about was small but plentiful. "No, sir." "No, please." Darren's eyes ticked up once, and then were still again. The quiet drew its own outline around him. He watched the distance between Razer's shoulder and the column. He watched the hand of the man on Razer's left uncurl. Curl. He could smell mint under the bleach and the copper, the cheap kind that stomps rather than freshens. Behind Darren, a chain shuffled. A CO's radio crackled 3 words. Unintelligible. The consonants chewed by static. The camera diode blinked, and the blink caught on the edge of Razer's smile and made it look like a twitch. Spider, a narrow man with elbows like parentheses, came from behind and pushed, not hard, just enough to test what moved. Darren rocked forward half an inch and settled back into vertical, as if the floor had corrected itself beneath him. "Answer the man," Spider said, a little too eager. "Thorne. Right. Answer when the boss talks." "Boss." The word made pockets of heads turn and then turn away. People love to be near power if it's not pointed at them. Darren rotated only his neck. His eyes met Spider's without warming. There was no show in the look, only measurement. Spider's breath tightened. It was small, but it was there, a little hitch like a runner stepping on gravel. "Leave him alone," Darren said. The sentence landed without emphasis. A note played true to pitch and offered to the room. Razer stepped in, closing the gap, carrying his own weather. Aftershave gone sour. Something meaty from lunch. Ink. His height turned from architecture to pressure. "Or what?" he said, still not loud, and the quiet made his question clearer. A knife made sharper by water. "What are you going to do about it?" "Thorne." Darren didn't answer. He didn't drop his eyes either. The silence had edges that didn't glint. It drank light. Somewhere a drawer slid in. A phone rang in an office 2 doors away and ended itself. Razor's gaze searched Darren's face for something he knew how to use. Flinch. Blink. A confessional muscle, but found only patience, arranged neatly like folded towels. For a breath. Half measure. His jaw clicked closed. It was a sound for himself, not for the room. He stepped back a pace. An almost rest. A little grace note. He might deny later. He made the denial himself as he receded. "We'll see you around," he said, like a promise left under a windshield wiper. "We'll see what you're made of." The men near him unspooled and rewound, the line reforming into other conversations that weren't conversations. Spider peeled last, and as he went, he sacrificed a look back that made his mouth thin. The CO with the stamped forms didn't glance up. The radio spat another burst of grammarless sound. The diode blinked. Darren drew a breath and set it down. He gathered the bag, the folded fabric, the new weight of the place. He stepped when told. He stopped when told. He existed in the exact shape required by each instruction, and nothing more. They ran him through another door. The air inside was warmer, breath crowded, smell of detergent. Losing a fight against damp laundry. Carts rattled by. Someone coughed, the cough of a man who'd been bored with coughing for years. A bulletin board held rules under pushpins that had rusted into color. Single file. A CO said at the mouth of a narrower corridor. Not cruel, only tired. Eyes forward. Eyes forward. Darren's eyes obeyed and still managed to keep the corners of the world. A reflection in a scuffed plexiglass panel gave him Razor's tattoos again, reversed into hieroglyphs. The angle told him who leaned where without turning his head. They were waiting when the corridor spit him back toward the common artery. Razor not close, but close enough to own the air. He let a coin, or something coin-like, click between 2 knuckles. The sound was a metronome that wasn't his. Spider stood 2 men behind, practiced casual, hands tucked into sleeves, as if sleeves knew better. The flow of bodies slowed, then stilled, the way people slow for an accident without admitting it. The CO who had said quiet means order watched from near the door, eyes, doing math between duty and inertia, his lips pressed together. He didn't move the math into action. Razor took a step that placed his boot toe on the yellow boundary line, and then another that set it past. He smiled at himself for the second step. Darren felt the nearness in his skin before he marked it with his eyes. Heat. Mint again. The faint rasp of fabric over tattooed forearm. Razor breathed out through his nose, a humorless approval of his own staging. He set his voice down at a pitch meant to settle into the bones of the moment. "Time to pay your respects," he said, each word polished like a shoe on Sunday. "Thorne." "Now?" The yellow line still lived under his boots. Razor's breath hung mint and mean between them, a thin knife of scent. The hall kept humming. Long fluorescent ribs, singing their insect song. Somewhere, a laundry cart rattled like loose change no one would claim. A radio coughed static and swallowed itself. The red camera eye blinked, patient as a drip. Darren did not move. Stillness, for him, was not surrender. It was a lever he could pull without lifting a hand. He watched the small weights in the room declare themselves, the twitch at Spider's sleeve where fingers worried a seam, the set of a guard's jaw pretending disinterest while doing math, the bend in Razer's stance that said, he expected gravity to help him win. I do not pay, Darren said, calm as a signature, silence stretched, deliberate. A breath held a little longer than comfort. In that compressed air, between voice and touch, an invisible sentence slid into place, clean as a stamp. He was the quiet newcomer in Redmore, and also a legendary hitman that Razer had not recognized. The room was ignorant of that line. Ignorance had value. Darren felt its weight and kept it from spilling. Razer's palm rose, slow, the way a man tests water. He placed it flat against Darren's chest, not a shove, a measurement. The skin-warm report told Darren what he needed. Razer was used to pushing first and thinking later. A hand like that returned to its owner sooner or later, empty. The older guard with the stamped forms cleared his throat. Move the line, he said, neither hard nor soft. The bodies stitched themselves forward. The corridor remembered how to breathe. Darren stepped when the tape wanted him to step, and stopped when the next tape said stop. His shirt scratched at the shoulder where a seam had been misread by a machine. He filed the sting. Friction would bite later if he let sweat salt the spot. Keep it clean. Keep it dry. A simple plan is a durable plan. He watched shadow angles slide along cinder block as doors opened and closed. He counted the hum's lazy stutter. The hum, then the flicker, then the hum again, a pulsing that could be ridden in the dark. If the lights died at an unkind moment, the afterglow from the tubes would hold for a handful of heartbeats, one breath, then another half beat more, enough to move from one shadow to the next without leaving a clean silhouette on the wall. He pictured the hallway as a slow river. He could cross it in 3 silent steps if the current of attention bent elsewhere. He could cross it in 4 if it did not. A clerk in a windowed cell took his form and returned a wristband. Wear it, lose it, and you do not exist. The plastic clicked shut around his bone. The memory of other bands tried to rise. He pressed it down. Today's band was just plastic. Control the story inside your skull before someone else writes it. The dorm offered heat and damp, and the steady animal noise of a room that never truly sleeps. Bunks stacked like scaffolding. Mattresses thin as broken promises. The air smelled of detergent that had lost faith. Metal damp from the breath of too many men, and the faint ghost of burnt oil from the kitchen. Shoes thumped. Cards snapped. Someone laughed in a register that didn't fit the light. Top bunk. Row 3. Right side, the guard said with his chin. Darren climbed. The ladder spoke in small vibrations through his foot, into his shin, into his hip. He set the clear bag in the corner and, rather than place things, he measured. The shelf cubby was shallow, not as shallow as it looked. He pressed a knuckle along its back, bone to wall, counting quietly in the body instead of the mouth. One knuckle deep and a whisper more. Enough for a folded scrap, not enough for anything solid. A viable hide, if the object were soft and small and needed only to pass a quick glance. He touched the underside lip of the shelf. Rough, could scrape skin if you pulled fast. He wrapped the soap in the paper twice, not to protect the soap, but to protect the shelf from leaving a telltale smear. The comb slid in flat, teeth facing the wall to catch less light. His bunk spoke to him through the frame. When someone heavy crossed the aisle, the weld shivered. Vibration traveled along steel, into bolt, into block, came back as a mutter. He laid 2 fingers to the rail, closed his eyes, and listened. Different men made different news. Fear walked on the balls of the feet and let the heel hesitate. Arrogance carried more heel weight than fear. Razor's gate, when it came, would declare itself before Razer arrived. The red camera eye in the dorm blinked slower than the one up the hall. He matched his breath to it for a count of breaths and let it go. Mimicry buys you entrance. Pattern buys you time. Your own pace buys you decisions. Spider drifted past like weather that had read its cue. House rules, he said to the air below the ladder, casual as a shrug. He did not perform with his shoulders. Respect is cheap. You asked earlier, Darren said. I answered earlier. Spider smiled without moving his mouth. So you did, he said, and drifted on. His eyes slipped back once. A returning tide, testing whether the sand had kept shape. Darren watched the absent Spider left more carefully than he had watched the presence. Chow rolled toward them, with the sound of trays kissing metal and the smell of water arguing with starch. The line moved. Darren took what was offered and put it exactly where the tray wanted it. He kept the spoon from banging the lip. Sound carried far in rooms like this, and arrived with a name pinned to it. Razor's shadow arrived before he did. Ink climbed his neck like night vines. Old bruises made rings on his knuckles. A gallery of small trophies. His bones wore with pride. He treated the question of name like a ritual again. Not because he needed the answer, but because the ritual made him taller. Thorne, Darren said. Just Thorne, Razor said, as if politeness were a currency he printed, and those who refused were counterfeit. You like being hard. Thorne. The spoon clicked once against the tray and stilled. The steam rose into Darren's face. He counted quietly the distance between the pot and this table by heat loss on his lip. He would eat while fuel still behaved like fuel. He would not let hunger strip precision. Pay your respects, Razor said. I do not pay tribute, Darren said, and set the tray down with no extra sound at all. Razor stepped back half a step, the little dance of a man who had met an unexpected edge, and decided to pretend it was part of his choreography. We will make time, he said. We will teach you. Darren carried the tray to a wall with good sight lines and poor blind spots. He ate with the care of a man loading a machine that would be asked to run. Between bites, his eyes drifted as eyes do at tables. In the drift, the room turned into a map. Pillars that broke camera cones, corners where a late shadow could swallow a quick man, doors that breathed more often than others, a guard whose boot dragged on the pivot, a detail that meant something if you needed the sound of a turn to tell you he was coming. The napkin dispenser across the aisle wore a tired shine that turned into a mirror if you asked nicely. In it he saw Spider's eyes pretending not to watch. Saw the way the eyes returned to the same spot on Darren's shoulder, as if the shoulder might blink. Darren did not reward the gaze by meeting it. He lifted bread and tasted the metal off the steam, the salt iron from a pan that had not been seasoned in years. He swallowed. Fuel is fuel. The camera by the serving line blinked at a quicker tempo than the dorm. Recorders differed by wing. Power surges nipped one system more than another. He filed the rhythm. If a man paid attention, the building told him where it was strongest and where it leaked. He took the long way back because distance teaches shortcuts. The bulletin board's rules shed a curling corner. The posted schedule carried the drumbeat of count after count after count, a chorus that meant nothing until the moment it meant everything. The laundry doorway blew damp heat that stuck to his face. He let it and he listened. Washers groaned a little off each other. One was out of time. He marked it by ear, and then marked how far the sound traveled before the walls chewed it. If he ever needed to dissolve into noise, he would know which noise to chew. At the bunk, he lay on his back, forearm across his eyes. The red leaked through skin and turned the world beneath into soft bloodlight. He breathed and laid the hums in their places. Big hum for the hall, middle hum for a fan that still tried, small hum for the old wires telling stories. He counted cycle quietly. Hum, then flicker, then hum, a metronome with a limp that he could still dance to. In the dark, should darkness come, the tubes would ghost for a few heartbeats. That could carry him from one shadow to one more. He fixed the path in his mind. Ladder, floor, 2 steps past the chest crate, slide along the wall where paint bubbled, pivot at the door's hinge shadow, wait for the guard with the dragging boot to show you his rhythm, then move. Footfalls came and went and spoke. Fear tried to erase itself. Arrogance announced. He read both through the bunk frame. The steel translated heel into language. Information is a kindness if you honor it. Spider came back near dusk of the room, walking like a tourist in a neighborhood he claimed to own. "You have a lot to learn," he said, voice almost kind. The kindness felt like a borrowed coat. Darren turned his head and found him. He did not blink. "I learn once," Darren said. The words were not volume, not threat. They were a policy statement. Spider's smile tried to get wider and then did not. He nodded, as if agreeing with a remark about weather. "We will see," he said, because men like him loved the promise inside those words. The dorm folded into evening. A guard's count rolled through rows. Numbers called and answered like a litany. The television gave faces its cheap ocean blue. A door hinge begged oil and was ignored. Someone ironed a crease into a voice and then laughed where the crease landed. Darren slid his hand under the pillow and found only fabric. Good. Clean. The habit was not for comfort. It confirmed absence. He let his breathing settle into the pocket between sounds. If you learn that pocket, you can make your movements fit inside it and vanish. He set the plastic band a quarter turn around his wrist to keep the skin beneath dry. The camera blinked its small blink. He kept its tempo in the back of his brain and allowed his own pulse to choose a different song. He stored what he had measured. Shelf depth, shelf lip, the napkin mirror trick, the washer out of time, the door hinge that told you a story before you saw the door. The fact that Razer stepped a little too far over lines because stepping a little too far had always worked. He made a simple stake and kept it bright. Stay shadow. A rumor is a leash. A headline is a cage. Silence, used correctly, is an armed room. The dorm exhaled. Pipes argued in the ceiling. A man laughed in his sleep and then apologized to no one. Heat and damp settled like a second blanket. Darren closed his eyes. Not to trust, but to conserve. He turned the red under his arm into a low sky and breathed until the air took his shape. Order, not peace. The guard had said earlier he would live with order. He would carry peace like a tool he did not show. Morning came the way prison mornings always do, not with dawn, but with permission. Lights woke before faces. Air pushed under the door, wet with mop water. Keys spoke in little conversations. Rings. Tapping rings as a guard walked the row. Orders slid into the room like knives wrapped in cloth. Up, count, line. Darren opened his eyes beneath the red mask. His forearm made, then lowered the arm and let the dorm collect itself. He pressed 2 fingers to the bunk rail and listened through steel. Footfalls declared their owners. In the aisle near the door, fear tiptoed on the balls of the feet, 2 bunks back. Arrogance landed its heel first and asked the ground to accommodate. The older guard with the dragging boot tried, for a handful of steps, to lift and glide, then forgot, and let the drag return. The metal told truths that mouths might lie about. His shelf was as he had left it, soap wrapped twice, comb with teeth facing the wall to keep light from catching. He turned the plastic wristband a fraction, so the skin beneath could breathe. Then he rose, folded into the river of bodies, and joined the slow current heading for Chow. He kept a wall on his left and a pillar at 1 o'clock of his gaze, a geometry that denied easy angles without advertising caution. He did not look like a man avoiding trouble. He looked like a man keeping pace with a river that already knew its bed. The corridor smelled of hot pipes and bleach that had earned overtime. Overhead, the camera eye blinked in a tempo faster than the dorm unit. He counted the blink against his breath, and then untied the count. A dryer deeper in the wing coughed a tired bearing. He logged the cough as cover sound for a small movement, if a small movement were required later. Information is a kindness if you store it where your body can reach. The chow hall was a machine with heat for a face. Trays slid and kissed metal, each voice a different note. Darren lifted one from the stack, and the sound it gave him was a sharp clatter, the bright chatter of a newer piece, 2 down the stack. Another tray answered with a dull thud, the sound of a pan that had taken too many falls and wore its dents like old medals. He weighed the brightness in his palm and the dullness in his ear, and read thickness and wear. Newer tray, less wobble, cleaner reflection. Older tray, deeper scuffs, easier to hang on to but louder. If it met a hard surface, wrong. He kept the newer tray. Predictable travel, predictable balance, noise that could be shaped. At the steam table, he let heat draw a map on his face. The ladle struck the pot with a tired slap. He raised his tray, a breath, into the rising cloud, and tested it on his lip. Not for comfort, but for timing. This pan had been set down recently, steam with a pepper edge. That pan along the line had sat longer. The air above it felt thick and stale. He measured without looking like a man measuring. He accepted the portion the server gave, slid forward, and took a slice of bread with fingertips rather than palm, not to keep his hand clean but to keep loose crumbs from tracing a line he could not control. He carried the tray into the hall the way a man carries a quiet thought. The benches were unkind. The tables were better than nothing. Posters wore down their own command. Do not trade. Do not throw. Obey staff. Obey posted sign. Obey. He chose a spot near a pillar that clipped a camera cone. Without creating a blind pocket large enough to invite a knife, he set the tray down with a contact soft enough to be forgettable. Metal spoke gently and then fell silent. He moved the spoon with his thumb, a small glide that placed it just a hand-width farther from his body, not fussing, clearing a hazard. A policeman of inches. He breathed the heat off the food until steam loosened. Then took a measured bite. He chewed exactly, counting in the body, not the mouth. He let each piece take the same number of bites, enough to warn him if metal lurked inside the brown or the salt. He would not be taught a lesson by a sliver of sharpened spoon. He would teach the spoon to declare itself first. Razer was in the room. Because the room had changed shape, conversations shortened their words. Laughter hid behind hands. Even the steam seemed to fold and drift toward the corner where he liked to stand. Spider's voice carried from behind and 2 seats, right? A soft remark, dressed as amusement. Razer did not take stage at the serving line. He preferred an audience arranged and fed. He preferred a field with pieces already placed. Darren tasted salt and the iron of a pan that needed mercy. He counted swallows and kept the rhythm level. He lifted bread, and as he lifted, he studied the napkin dispenser. Its face was a tired mirror. Enough polish remained to hold a world. In its warped sheen he watched Spider lean, watched a grin twitch and settle, watched a hand hide in a sleeve and make a fist there. He did not turn to see these things. He did not reward them with the currency of his eyes. He let the mirror bring the room to him. He let the room know that he had seen without moving his neck a degree. Razer arrived at the table the way weather arrives, not loud, but absolute. Mint over grease, ink beneath fabric, bruises on the knuckles faded into rings like a calendar of fights. He did not sit. He posted like a sign, and trusted men to read. "What is your name?" He said. "Thorne," Darren said, the word balanced in his mouth like a coin already counted. "Just Thorne." Razer said, "You like being hard." "Thorne." Darren let his gaze rest in Razer's eyes, and kept the rest of his face calm water. His thumb touched the spoon again, a quiet push to send it another inch away. A house-cleaning gesture for a surface that might need to become a path. Then his voice, even and small enough to fit inside the moment without bursting it. "I value predictability." Spider's reflection in the dispenser stuttered, as if the grin had met a step it did not expect. Razer's smile sharpened, the eyes narrowed as if trying to see the trick in a deck he thought he owned. The spoon made no further sound. The camera diode above the door kept its blink. A guard laughed at a joke that did not belong to him and stopped halfway. "Pay your respect," Razer said. "I do not pay tribute," Darren said. The words cost nothing and traveled well. Spider stepped into Darren's near space from behind the right shoulder, and his shoulder brushed Darren's once, not a hit, more like a signature scratched into a corner. "Answer when the boss talks," Spider said, offering the line to the room to see who would clap. Darren turned only his head. The look he gave Spider was a clean sheet of glass. It did not threaten. It returned. It showed Spider the hesitation living under his grin, and gave it a name that Spider could feel behind his ears. The breath caught, the way it had before. Spider made a small sound meant to be a laugh, and filed the moment under later. Razer set his knuckles on the table edge. The weight traveled through tray and metal into the bones of Darren's hand where his little finger rested. Pressure declared itself before mouths awry. Darren let the pressure pass and did not translate it into his face. He kept his attention on Razer without offering competition. He kept the choice to move living in his shoulder and kept it visible only to himself. "We will make time," Razer said. "We will teach you." His use of "we" had become a rope he attached to other men. Darren watched the rope and measured its length. He blew once across his spoon. Heat now at the precise place between steam and warm. He swallowed. Fuel. Data. Nothing more. Razer leaned back the smallest amount, a body truth that beat the mouth to the admission. He backed the half-step and dressed the retreat as a prowl, letting a grin drag the room after him. "We will see you around," he said, tucking the promise beneath the wiper of the morning. He moved off. Gravity went with him and the table lightened. The tray told Darren that before his eyes did, Spider lingered 2 beats, then eased in, hip cocked and casual. He let his gaze climb to Darren's, hungry for purchase and a little too bright. "You have a lot to learn," Spider said, gentle as a teacher who liked the smell of his own chalk. Darren met him, unblinking. "I learned once," he said. The sentence did not flex. It simply existed. Spider nodded as if they had agreed about weather. He went and took his brightness with him, and left his hesitation stuck in the air like dust. Darren finished at the pace he chose. He chewed each bite, the same measured count, a private metronome that kept his jaw honest and his tongue awake for edges that did not belong in food. He wiped the tray with the edge of bread to erase streaks that might blow later into a signal. When he rose, He rotated just enough to keep both the pillar and the door inside his frame. He stacked the tray gently, letting the stack speak its inventory to him. Heavy still, less wobble than yesterday. A top tray with a bent lip that complained. He allowed that complaint to place itself in his memory. On the way out, the napkin dispenser again told its little truths. In it he watched, without watching. A guard scratch the back of his neck and glance at the corner where gossip liked to live. In it he watched a man adjust a sock to hide a wrap of fabric at the ankle. He let the mirror collect. He did not harvest now. It is enough sometimes to know which field grows what. The corridor greeted him with thinner air and paint that collected fingerprints like a jealous ledger. Light fell in sheets that had edges he could step through. The camera blinked 3 fasts and 1 slow, a stutter that might mean a tired wire or a hungry recorder. He marked it without staring. The dryer coughed again, friendlier, now that he had named it. The hinge of the chow door complained in the same voice as it had yesterday and would tomorrow. Predictability. Back in the dorm, the television washed the room with tired ocean blue. A chess game clacked with plastic patience. Men argued about a rule while carefully not arguing about the thing under the rule. The bunk frame spoke when bodies climbed and settled. Darren put 2 fingers to the rail and read the news. Razer passed the row without slowing. The steel translated heel into voice. Confidence carried like weight, not like speed. Spider floated behind with steps that tried to erase themselves as they made themselves. The drag boot paused for 3 strides, and then confessed the effort by scraping again. A camera blink held its tempo like a drummer who loved his job. Darren checked the shelf by habit, paper flat, soap snug, comb quiet. He set his forearm across his eyes and let the red light through skin turn the ceiling into a low sky. He turned the morning into a ledger his body could carry without writing. Tray timbre, steam timing, spoon placement, mirror angle, the count in his jaw, the sentence he had given Razer, and the way the word predictability had moved behind the man's eyes, as if looking for the handle to lift him. He breathed and matched the dorm for a few beats, and then let the dorm chase him. If the lights failed, he would walk the ghost left by the tubes. If noise rose, he would lay his step under the cough of the dryer or the hinge of the door. If the guard tried to move without dragging, the sudden silence would announce him more loudly than the scrape ever had. He did not rehearse a fight. He rehearsed the room. He kept the stake he had chosen where he could see it. Stay shadow. Let ignorance remain valuable. Turn quiet into a blade and a shield and a door you open for yourself when the hall thinks you have none. Razer had not spoken a threat aloud. He did not need to. The body of the room had borrowed his mouth. Darren had answered without raising his voice. He set the spoon where he wanted it. He set his policy in 1 sentence and let it stand. He closed his eyes, not to leave the world, but to file it under the right name. The hum held, the rail spoke, the camera blinked. The day began to spend itself, and Darren kept a finger on the ledger, counting without numbers, waiting without waiting, learning the game by letting the board confess. The dorm woke in layers, breath first and motion later, as if the room was an animal deciding whether to rise. Light pressed at the paint and made it look damp again. Keys spoke softly and then yielded to the slower throat of a cart. Count rolled through, a tide that had kept every appointment it ever made. Darren slid his forearm from his eyes and let the place come into focus by itself. He set 2 fingers on the bunk rail and listened through steel, steps translated into meaning. Near the door, fear touched down at the balls of the feet, 2 bunks over. Arrogance led with the heel and requested obedience from the floor. The older guard tried to hide his dragging boot and managed for a handful of paces before the scrape returned with a relief he did not bother to disguise. His shelf was as he had left it, at least in the shape of things. Paper lay flat where he had flattened it. The soap was wrapped twice. The comb sat with its teeth facing the wall to keep light from catching. He did not stare. Staring writes value on an object in a language thieves understand. He turned the plastic wristband a fraction so the skin beneath could breathe, and walked into the line as if the word river also meant man. The corridor smelled of bleach doing overtime and hot metal suppressing complaint. The camera above the door blinked in a rhythm he already knew. He matched one breath to it, and then let his lungs go back to choosing for themselves. Far down the hall, a dryer coughed in the same spot of its spin, the sound of a bearing promising to fail, and holding that promise without hurry. Predictability wears a tired face and a bright promise both. Chow unfolded the way it had to unfold. Newer trays answered the hand with a sharp clatter. Older trays answered with a dull thud. Steam drew a small map on his lip. He counted his chews, like a soldier counts paces in fog, not to arrive faster, but to keep shape and warn the tongue if a hard edge was hiding in soft food. He watched the napkin dispenser. Without appearing to watch, in its tired shine, he caught Spider's grin twitching, and then flattening as if it wanted to print itself on a wall and thought better of it. Razer's gravity arrived before Razer did, and changed the weather of the room. Neither came close. They were choosing an hour that offered them more stage. Back in the dorm, Steele told the truth before sight did. When Darren sat, the frame gave him a small, new story. Pressure had lived where pressure did not belong. His fingers read the change and passed the message to his eyes. He did not snap to the shelf. He stood and let his hands invent simple chores while his gaze moved the inches it needed. The clear bag rested where he had placed it, but the top edge bent the wrong way, as if a hand had pressed down while turning the plastic. The paper around the soap wore a crease he did not own. The comb sat a thumb width nearer the lip than he remembered. The difference between care and carelessness, that small width was everything. Spider drifted past with two men, who laughed too fast and too much, laughter that flew up like birds, startled from a wire. He leaned against a post and practiced not looking. Razer did not show himself. Darren adjusted the sheet and made the act ordinary, but he ran one finger under the shelf lip and felt the grit. A clean scar ran through the dirt where no clean belonged. He kept the grit on his skin for a breath, the way a reader keeps a finger in a book, then wiped it on his pant leg, like a man who had nothing to hide. He lifted the clear bag and weighed it with a palm that remembered. Some absence touched his hand the way a draft touches a candle. He did not reach in. To rummage now would be to perform alarm for an audience hunting reassurance. He counted backward without numbers, taking bearings inside his body. The time since Chow, the time between the guard's effortful quiet and the dryer cough returning to its promise. The time since the camera above the dorm door had stuttered once and steadied again. Whoever had tested his shelf had chosen that narrow window when staff believed themselves the least visible. Proud timing, careless hands. He sat on the bunk and set stillness down hard enough for it to be noticed. Spider wandered closer, pulling a conversation behind him like a net that kept losing fish. He set a shoulder to the bunk post and offered his voice soft enough to be read as care. "You lose something, Thorne?" Darren looked at him as if Spider had named the weather. He gave the smallest shrug that was not a shrug. "Loss is a teacher," Darren said. Spider showed a slice of tooth. He studied Darren's face for the flinch he had come to collect and found patience instead. His weight shifted heel, then toe. The heel said arrogance inside a coat of humor. The toe said he wanted off this square. The aisle bumped him twice over the next hour, each bump precise enough to add up. The first arrived from a shoulder, pretending to hurry. The second carried a set of knuckles on the forearm. Quick and sure, testing whether stillness meant sleep, Darren let the knuckles pass through air where ribs might have been and did not offer a hand in return. He marked the elbow that belonged to the knuckles and filed the measurement like a folded map. At laundry, a cart narrowed the doorway and heat put its palm on his face. Towels hung limp and confessed to water. He stopped a half-step sooner than a man would stop if he came to ask permission. That half-step announced he would not enter another man's pocket uninvited, and placed him beneath a camera that wore dust for a coat. The glass had a clean circle in the size of a hand. Someone had wiped it. Someone had decided to see clearly. Dust marks are invitations and evidence, both. The dryer coughed, and he let its sound collect his small retreat as he reversed out and let the corridor fold him in again. He returned to the dorm and found the sheet seam no longer true. His corner pointed north by the smallest hair. People who do not make beds do not know how sheets want to lie. He knelt and lifted the edge enough to check one stub of cotton thread he had left, bowing against the mattress, ticking. It now lay flat and neat. Someone had been careful with the lie, but thread keeps a memory longer than neatness. He made the sheet correct and left a new bow under the edge where only love would look. He opened the clear bag, because refusing to open it would declare panic in a language understood by men who collect panic for a living. The bar of soap weighed wrong by a light margin his palm could count. He unwrapped it and set the two halves together in his hand. The new edge ran fresh across the pale surface in a line that had no hesitation. He rotated the halves to see where grain and pressure should match. The line did not belong to careless fingers. It had been written by a blade or a sharp length of plastic worried into service. He pressed the halves together until they made a near hole and felt their refusal to fuse. This was not theft for need. This was a test wrapped in insult. It told him someone at Razer's back pocket had a cutting edge and wanted Darren to discover it, and wanted Darren to know they wanted him to discover it. He tapped the comb with a thumb and walked teeth by feel the way a reader travels a line of raised letters. One gap where a tooth had been now stared back, small and certain. He set that tooth's former place against the pad of his index finger and held still until the brain drew a picture. A chip taken clean, edges smoothed by a sleeve or a palm. The comb had not simply lived a hard life and lost a piece. A hand had tried the idea of a weapon and decided it was not ready yet. He was not dealing with sloppiness. He was dealing with practice. The comb and the soap together spelled a sentence that did not need speaking. We test. We prepare. We want you to hold the knowledge and pay interest on it. Spider came back with a wider man whose tattoo tried to enlarge the arm that wore it. They carried a joke between them and laid it down with careful hand. Spider's glance slid across the shelf and then to Darren, too swift for words and too slow for innocence. "You keeping clean?" "Thorne," Spider said. "Always." Darren said. "We like clean here," Spider said, and the word clean happily stood in for any tool he needed at the moment. Razer drifted through the far end of the row. He did not cross the room toward Darren. He did not need to. Men shrank fractionally into their shoulders around him. Conversations began late and ended early. The air made a shape and held it for him as if the room were his mirror. Darren measured Razer by the depth of this hollow and marked the place on his map where the hollow would most often be. A guard called yard and the river created itself. Darren stepped into it and kept the same geometry as before. Wall left, pillar ahead, camera blink that meant nothing once counted. Outside, air tasted of distant grease from kitchen vents and cold metal from the fence. The sky laid a flat sheet over the yard and refused to choose a color. He walked the edge of shadow, not the heart, giving himself contrast but not concealment. He let his eyes collect the grid. Post, gate, tower. The timing of a guard who turned on habit rather than instruction. The way gravel changed voice under different weight. Somewhere behind, Spider watched from a position that could be denied later and would be. A nervous man near him stared at the sky and kept checking the gate in a rhythm he could not hide. Darren filed the nervous man under later because later had already been sketched by someone else's hand. When yard closed, the corridor took them back through mesh that rattled in its one familiar spot. The sound of a hinge that dreamed of new screws. The hall returned him to the dorm with television blue and the smell of damp cotton. He climbed, set 2 fingers on the rail, and let steel talk. There had been more weight near his shelf, and the weight had not stayed long enough to learn the bunk's language. He slid down and unwrapped the soap again, set the halves together once more in his palm, and studied the cut until the line told him which hand had done it. Not a butcher's finish, not a careful craft, a fast draw across a flat, a test cut, likely done standing, not seated. A decision rushed because the window was small, and pride wanted to fit inside it. Spider arrived exactly long enough after Darren touched the bag to pretend coincidence. He leaned, effortless, like a man who had practiced in empty room. Inventory day. Thorne, he said, every day. Darren said. Spider's smile was a circle drawn by a blunt pencil. That is a lot of work. It keeps the day honest, Darren said. Spider's laugh was soft and proud of not understanding. Razer followed in his weather, let his gaze cross the shelf once and cross empty air once, then moved on. The room made space for him, and then closed it behind him, as water does after a boat. Surface pretended smooth while churn remained under the skin. Afternoon slid into a light with more ash than milk. The television talked with its mouth half shut. A chess game produced plastic clicks that took themselves seriously. The dryer coughed where it always coughed. The hinge at the chow door argued with oil that never came. A guard called shower. Men rose with the stiffness of men accustomed to cold tile and quick hands. Darren stood with them. He checked the shelf without checking. Soap wrapped twice. Comb teeth to the wall. A hair he had placed across the back corner like a bridge now lay broken in 2 near the seam. He did not touch the hair. He touched a wrinkle near the foot of the bed and smoothed it, as if that had been his only purpose. He turned the wristband again and joined the river. The corridor breathed damp. Water found a path and ran it, making a thin sound along the tile. The camera over the shower block blinked a steady-duty blink, a soldier on post, unaware of the trouble steam could give it. The laundry camera had been wiped to see more. The shower cameras would see less for the same reason. Foam and fog would fracture lines and swallow edges. If a man wanted a theater with witnesses, he chose laundry. If a man wanted to disrupt witness and shorten distance, he chose steam. Darren let the thought pass through him and settle. He did not plan a fight. He planned the room. The gate opened with a hum and a click. Inside, tile gave back the light in a cold, polite way. The air had the old kiss of refrigerated breath. One head hissed without producing water. Another dripped in a stubborn tempo. The hum above flickered once and held. A small test of loyalty, a small warning of frailty. He stepped to the wet edge and let the thin sheet of water take the rubber at his heel. and then release it. He placed his weight with the care of a man setting down a glass in a moving car. He unwrapped the soap and set both halves into his palm again, just long enough to let the cut flash its truth in this colder light. A blade had visited and declared its confidence. He wrapped the halves once more and slid the bundle into a pocket of towel where it would live for now, not as property, but as data. He touched the comb, found the gap where the tooth had been, set his fingertip into the absence like a reader, touching a city on a map and thinking about roads that lead to it. Someone had tried edgework and pocketed the idea for later. He breathed once, and the breath fogged a little and ghosted away. Water touched the leather at his toe, cold as a coin dipped in winter. Steam gathered low and coiled around shins, and then unwound to make paths that cut the room into lanes. He did not look left or right. He let his gaze fall to the worn tile in front of him, the place where the glaze had surrendered to years of feet and cleaners and heavy bodies. The floor had its own map, a geography of use, a river of scuffs, showing where men usually chose to stand and where they usually chose to fall. He did not need to search. The map was complete. Laundry meant clean eyes, shower meant fog, and the sound of water confusing microphones. Those two facts had been waiting for one another the whole day. The powder of dust on a lens and the fresh scrape in a pale bar had held hands and pointed here. The tile answered with cold, the air answered with a hiss, the hum answered with a flicker that marked the timing of a room about to become crowded. He stepped forward into the steam, with his shoulders loose and his neck quiet. He set his foot and felt the tile talk. He let the talk finish. He already knew where they were. Steam thickened in patient ropes, softening edges without hiding them. Tile bled cold through rubber and into bone. A stubborn head hissed without water. A promison pause. Another dripped a steady beat, an old clock remembering its duty. The light above hummed and held. Loyalty proven for now. Darren stood where the glaze had been worn to a matte river by years of feet. The floor was a map of pressure and habit. Darker paths told him where bodies liked to plant, pivot, and fall. He set his stance the way a craftsman sets a chisel, aligned, quiet, ready to answer without speaking first. Nothing in him idled. Stillness for him was an engine at a low purr. Weight arrived at the doorway before words did. Ripples moved across the thin water skin, crossed the drip radius, and broke in telling ways. A thin body took short steps and wore cheap mint, turned sour. A wider body landed heel first, asking the tile to cooperate. And then the weather of Razer entered, the room changing shape as if it tilted a shoulder for him. Steam reached up and tried to pocket their outlines. Darren did not raise his head. He read shadows on wet tile. 3 figures stretched long, then divided to bracket him. Left, right, and patient center. The left shadow favored one knee. The right shifted balance, a hand itching for a pocket where a tool waited. The center stood deliberate, a decision tested and kept. Spider let his voice slide along the tile, pleased with its own echo. Time to finish a lesson. Thorne. Darren drew in one breath and then another. Cold air cooled the back of his throat, kept thought crisp. The drip kissed the toe of his shoe. He slid that foot a thumb of distance to dry tile, not fearing the water, fixing his first step in certainty. Razer lifted a hand, and the wide man to the left obeyed the gesture with a rush. Feet slapped wet. Arms committed their mistakes before the brain finished drafting them. Darren met momentum with placement, not force. He shifted along the worn river and let the charge spend itself on where he was not. The man's shins snagged a tile lip and faltered. Darren brought in the pivot nudge, a palm from below. No strike, a clean block that borrowed the arm's travel, and redirected it a hand's width. Forearm kissed ceramic with a blunt syllable. Breath left the body in a wrung towel sound. Spider lunged on the echo. A fraction late. Darren tilted his head as if listening to a faraway radio. Spider's fist cut through where an ear had been. Cold beads collected on Darren's cheek and slid off. Awake more than an injury. Darren caught the passing wrist, not to punish, but to reframe. It was fast, exact, and vanished. The instant it worked, Spider's hand met the nearest pipe. Tendons clicked a small refusal. That was not pain, that was repositioning. Spider tried to use resistance and found none. He stumbled 2 steps to keep his face from introducing itself to tile. Razer stepped forward and pulled a length of sharpened plastic from steam, the color of old milk, the edge of spite. The plastic made a high-pitched whistle as it cut air. The sound slid across Darren's skin and wrote itself into memory. The blade was message and proof. It sliced fog and left a bright thought line. Darren did not meet the point. He met the body that drove it. Hips confess first. Razer's weight rolled onto the front foot too quickly, trusting arrogance to finish the sentence. Darren crossed that roll with a glide born of geometry, not speed. His forearm boxed the knife wrist a breath, just enough to move its path a finger's width. The edge passed his ribs and found nothing. At the same time, he made room for the wide man's correction by turning a shoulder as a door in a narrow hall. A nudge placed on the breastbone became another version of the pivot nudge. The man's heel hunted slick tile and found no purchase. His back met the floor. Breath, leaving in a flat sack sound. Spider returned. Courage rushed by panic, cutting low for legs. Darren stepped on the low arc of Spider's forearm with a light pin, not a stomp, only enough to let Spider's own momentum press him to tile. A second white shard flashed in Spider's other hand and skittered against Darren's boot instead of flesh, leaving a bright scar in rubber. Darren flicked his toe. The shard spun on wet ceramic, a brief coin of light, and skipped toward the drain. Razer adjusted grip. Old bruises lived in faded rings on his knuckles. He cut for the throat. No flourish now, only intent. Darren rotated so the edge met the hard plane of forearm instead of neck. Sting sang on a skin like winter air. He accepted it and used the angle. He trapped the knife wrist against his own arm, drove down and out with hip torque and shoulder weight. The blade kissed tile, jumped, and spun beneath the spray. Darren flicked the hilt with the same tidy economy. The weapon spun once on the wet floor, catching light, then skated into the grate. There was a small clink at the iron mouth, and the sound of water gulping as the drain swallowed. He looked at the lip of the grate where the light ended. 2 pieces. Clean. Sealed. The wide man rose hard on adrenaline. He charged like a door, decided only shoulders could open it. Darren let him have the lane, then redirected. A palm to the jaw, not a blow, a steer. The man ran face first into a surprise, a head that chose that instant to wake and draw a cold lash down his spine. His stance crumpled for a heartbeat. Darren gave that heartbeat a shape. A forearm bridged his chest. A heel shaved his front foot. Knees found tile and stayed. Spider clamped from behind, arms hunting, ribs and breath. Darren lowered his center and let the grab collect nothing useful. He hooked Spider's ankle with his own and lifted the offered wrist. The world rotated Spider as if he were a poorly thrown baton. Shoulder met tile. Spider froze to keep pain from becoming a sound that would live longer than the bruise. Razer closed again. Eyes narrowed not from fear but from math. He fainted with the empty hand. A gamble made by men who think absence cannot injure. Darren honored the lie long enough to sell it back, then entered the small room inside Razer's reach, where levers shrink. He placed the heel of his palm beneath the jaw hinge, the other hand at the wrist, and turned them a breath. The neck left the strike, the wrist left the argument. Knees discovered the idea of gravity and accepted it. Steam lifted and fell like tired blankets. The song of water changed key as heads woke and slept. Darren moved on hiss, paused on drip, shifted angle on deep hum. So his steps lived under the noise instead of above it. The floor beneath his shoes told him when to stop asking it for help. The wide man stayed down, a palm over ribs, like a reader covering text. Spider propped himself on one forearm and watched his own breath make ghosts. Calculation edged into his face. The first true one of the morning, subtracting habit from outcome. He was learning the right thing at last. Not Darren's temper, Darren's process. Razer braced on hands. Pride, making a seat of tile. He tried to turn his head to check the grate. The neck refused its old obedience. Eyes went to the corner instead. He knew the story the grate now held. He knew there would be nothing to show later and nothing to be caught with now. Darren found Razer with a calm that did not swell or shrink. "Leave me alone," he said. The sentence arrived exactly the size the room could carry. No sermon, no triumph, policy in plain speech. He stepped away the way a man leaves a counter with correct chain, shoulders level, pace ordinary, sightlines open. He did not hurry. He did not offer his back carelessly. He lifted his towel and shook it once, listening to the small notes of water leaving cloth. He slid the soap bundle into the towel pocket by touch, feeling the mismatch of halves, not mourning, recording. He did not search for the missing comb tooth. He had already filed its absence with the drain's appetite. Silence became the loudest thing in the room. Darren's soles met tile without argument. The drip counted. The steam breathed. No other footfall dared add itself to the ledger. He crossed the worn channel where glaze had surrendered and made for the door that hummed when its lock thought about duty. Steam tried to follow and failed. The corridor held warmer air as if the building kept its heat for itself. Water shook off the towel in small coins and died on tile. He turned the plastic band a fraction to ease the pull and keep skin clean. Far down the wing, the drag boot confessed itself again. A scrape that did not belong to this hallway yet. Spider's steps were ghosts behind him. Razer gave the hall a silence heavy enough to feel. Recalculation needs quiet more than rage. He did not smile. He did not frown. He carried out the room's map and slid it into place beside the morning's ledger. The shiv's whistle, the two spins, the clink at iron, the water's swallow. The way Razer's eyes asked for the grate and could not turn to get it. The way Spider's breath learned to live shorter for a while. Evidence had been gathered and sealed by the building itself. The drain kept custody. The steam kept witness unreliable. The camera would offer fog and chorus, nothing actionable and everything memorable. Back in the dorm, television blue-washed faces flat. Chest plastic clicked. A night tried to look like a plan. Men looked up without looking. The bunk rail accepted Darren's palm and reported no new weight where the shelf lived. He opened the clear bag and set the soap halves together once, his thumb learning the fresh line as if braille. He tapped the comb until the gap answered him, and then set it down like a word finished on a page. A layback, forearm across his eyes. Red light bled through skin and made a false dusk. The ceiling hum steadied, a metronome with no song. The camera blinked a duty beat. The dryer coughed on cue. He breathed and put each sound back where it belonged. He left with nothing but quiet carries its own sound. Rumor would leave this room before the steam did. The story that would leave the shower would not need his voice. Silence left the shower faster than steam and took the shortest routes. It rode the damp down necks and along towel hems, slipped through grates and vents, and found the mouths that wait for stories because stories are a kind of food. By the time Darren reached the dorm again, the air had already learned a new way to look at him. Conversations shortened midword. A laugh tried to climb and slid back down its own throat. Men shifted along bunks to make gaps that were not quite corridors and not quite warning lines. They were not afraid of him. They were afraid of the rumor he had brought with him, as if rumor were wet ink that could smear onto anyone careless enough to brush close. He lay a breath with his forearm over his eyes and let red light bleed through skin into a private dusk. Steel under his fingers told him the news in the way steel speaks. Fear stepped light in 3 rows. Arrogance carried less heel than it had yesterday. The older guard's drag boot tried to be a whisper and failed in the middle of the promise. Nothing had changed, and everything had. Chow called the room into a river that pretended to be choice. Darren joined where a wall lived to his left, and a pillar stood at 1 o'clock of his sight. The camera above the door blinked its duty beat. He matched a single breath to it, and let the rhythm go. The corridor smelled of hot pipes, mop water tired of its work, and a cleanser that had never met a lemon. Somewhere down the wing, the dryer coughed in its favorite place, a reliable defect that made the building feel honest. The chow hall wore heat for a face. Trays clattered sharp when new, thudded dull when old. He chose a tray that promised balance and set it down with a gentle truth on the table he had measured days ago. The napkin dispenser sat where it always sat, its tired chrome still willing to be a mirror, for anyone who knew mirrors did not need to be glass. Razer held a corner, the way weather holds a horizon, making the room change shape by standing still. Spider floated in the near water, rope slack, then taut, then slack. The nervous man who orbited Spider touched his pockets as if counting ghosts he could not comfort. No one aimed at Darren. They aimed at the story about him and tried to stand downwind of it. Eata, like a careful machine, takes fuel, steady and without ritual. He chewed a count, his body understood. Grain, salt, the iron of a pan that had known too many days, no foreign edge. He blew steam off 1 spoonful, stored the time it took for warmth to replace heat, and moved the spoon an inch from his torso with his thumb, as if tidying a surface that might need to become a path. The napkin dispenser offered a small picture of a larger truth. In its bend of metal, the nervous man slipped from Spider's orbit and cut toward the service alcove that lived behind the line. A tray cart's edge threw back a sliver of that corner, and a sliver was enough. Shoulders hunched, head tilted. A glow rose in the hands cupped close to a chest. The glow brightened. White flared and held a heartbeat too long. A screenshot makes its own pause. Darren kept his shoulders ordinary. He let his eyes drift the way. Eyes drift when they follow steam up a wall and stop where the steam breaks. In the reflection he watched a thumb tap small bursts, a knuckle blanch, a mouth forget to close. Then the glow shifted. The top bar wore a small lock, lit and sure. Letters sat squat and clear, even through the curve of metal. Restricted. Numbers followed, neat as stamps. He did not say the time to himself. He filed it as shape and cadence, the way a musician stores a line he will have to play later. He took another measured bite and washed it down with a sip that let his jaw rest. In the reflection, the nervous man exhaled a long breath and put the phone away with a motion trying and failing to be smooth. He sought Spider with his eyes and caught Cloth at the elbow and drew him into the seam where 2 walls met. Spider did not smile. He listened the way a man listens at a door that used to open for him. The flinch that came did not belong to the cold. He glanced for Razer and then away, and then back, as if names could bite inside the head. The river moved him along, He wiped a smear from the tray with bread so it could not smear him later, stacked the metal with a hush, and let the hall carry him back to the corridor. The dorm received him with television blue and the soft plastic clicks of a chess game arguing in small squares. He placed his palm to the bunk rail. Steele said there were 2 new waits at the far end who had not yet learned how to stand still. Spider skimmed the aisle with a face arranged for weather and a pulse that disagreed. The nervous man came late by a few steps and watched his hands the way a man watches a dog he is not sure he owns. Razer appeared as if the room had made him. Volume lowered itself in his direction. He took a post where light from above cut his eyes into dark. He did not ask. He waited. Men came because that is what the room taught them. Spider touched a shoulder he was not looking at and spoke a folded paper into the space between. Razer read without moving his mouth. His head tipped the smallest degree. The tilt a man makes when a new door appears in a wall he thought complete. His fingers rose and, without thinking, found the hinge of his jaw, the place where Darren had taken him out of the fight in the steam. Skin remembered what pride tells it to forget. He dropped the hand. He did not repeat that mistake. Even in thought, a crackle coughed from a radio at the corridor mouth. The older guard arrived on a step without drag, and betrayed the effort on the next. A younger guard followed with eyes that pockets love because pockets think they can teach them. They walked their route with the posture of men told that now mattered. The younger man slipped into the service alcove without fuss. Habit had trained inmates to pretend that corner did not exist. Habit had trained staff to check it when the air went tight. He came out with a phone pinched between 2 fingers, edges only. The room inhaled. Spider forgot the performance and swallowed hard. The nervous man opened his mouth and misplaced the first word. The older guard lifted a clear bag with a zip seal, and the younger slid the device inside. Careful with prints he did not own. The zip drew shut with a small, smooth pull. The older guard uncapped a thick marker and wrote across the plastic. The squeak was thin and absolute, louder than any voice dared be just then. Device-sized, he wrote the time in letters, not numbers, and the initials that belonged to his name. The ink shone. Plastic turned into chain. The younger guard turned the bag so the screen faced out, held a breath, and the image pooled under clear skin. The padlock icon looked distorted through the plastic, but stayed sure. The word restricted bent at the edge and did not disappear. The bag made the screen appear farther away and more official. Darren did not need the napkin dispenser now. The angle gave him the letters, the lock, the quiet authority of a seal. He could feel the room read it too, flinch by flinch, breath by breath. The bag moved. The older guard initialed again, a small ritual that means you will not be able to say it was not in your hand when it was. He passed the evidence along with a nod that acknowledged weight had changed. The radio clicked once. The door breathed. The drag boot confessed itself on the way out, and was forgiven because the bag had already forgiven it. When the guards left, the dorm tried to find a volume that felt safe and could not. The sound of the marker still hung within the plastic. Darren rested his palm on Steele. He did not seek faces. Steele told him enough. The rumor made loops that tightened around the nervous man and Spider, and then around the corner where Razer let pride live. Men who listened because it has kept them whole listened more. Men who talk for safety spoke less. Even those who had been neutral moved half a step away from Darren, as if rumor had mass and shared it, not because they feared what he might do, because they feared what his quiet might bring. He tested this new distance and learned it. Isolation had become a tool the room handed him without meaning to. It was a barrier Razer could not easily break. A guard could read it, though a guard could decide that a man everyone avoids is a man the rules should visit. Silence. if you wear it without care, can look like guilt to anyone paid to sort faces into lines. He tightened a sheet corner, turned the plastic band a fraction to keep skin unbroken, moved the comb one tooth and back so his finger could learn the gap again, touched the soap bundle to remember what refusal felt like. He crossed the dorm in a pace the room would not point at later and grazed the service alcove. The camera there had been wiped in a neat circle, and now a smaller arc rode the edge where a thumb had helped. Eagerness leaves its own fingerprint even when the hand wears none. Spider drifted by, light in the knees and heavy in the shoulders, the way men walk when truth sits on them. He looked at Darren as if hunting a purchase and found only calm. He let his eyes go elsewhere and failed to look like it had been his idea. Razer did not approach. He occupied corners and let the corners work. His glance crossed the room like a cold draft. Darren measured it without being measured. The line between glance and plan lengthened. Pride lengthens it more. Pride makes plans fragile. Evening wore the building like a thin coat. Keys learned to keep their voices down. The camera light at the door clicked seconds into beads. Darren breathed inside that rhythm and then let his lungs break it so the rhythm would not own him. He counted the steps to the far wall in dark out of habit and stopped at a number he did not say. He had counted before. He did not need to count again. The day had printed its echo with a thicker ink than fists. A phone had glowed where it should not. A small lock had burned honest in a line of lies. A plastic bag had become a chain when a marker squeaked and wrote names and time. Somewhere a grate held two white teeth of plastic. The room pressed all of it into a single shape and slid that shape toward Razer while pretending not to watch. Razer touched his neck once and did not do it again. Night lowered itself. Darren lay back and gave the bunk rail his palm. New weight visited the frame and learned to be careful, the kind of careful a man uses when he adjusts metal in the dark. He heard whispers that would not shape themselves into words. A hush, broken by the small clicking noises of makeshift tools handled in pockets. He did not need the words. He did not need to hear. He read from the silence that the map had changed. Razer no longer wanted respect. He wanted blood evidence. Morning arrived as permission rather than light. The dorm woke in soft layers, breath first, and then the small negotiations of bodies returning to themselves. Steel under Darren's palm translated the room into facts. Fear tried to hide in the front of the feet. Arrogance touched down with less heel than the day before. The older guard attempted a smooth stride, and the scrape confessed itself halfway through. Darren slid his forearm from his eyes and let the world come into focus without being summoned. The diode over the door blinked its duty beat. He matched a breath to it, broke the match, and put his own rhythm back where it belonged. He checked the shelf without checking. Soap wrapped twice. Halvis still refusing union. Comb with a single tooth gone. The gap familiar to the pad of a finger. Paper edges where he had placed them, crease like a signature. He turned the plastic band at his wrist, a fraction so the skin beneath could breathe. Then joined the river when the room agreed to name itself a line. The corridor wore damp cotton and hot pipes for scent. Far down the wing the dryer kept its loyal cough. Predictability wore a tired coat and a bright promise. The camera above the threshold blinked in the tempo he knew. He let the blink pass through him and not into him. Chow gave heat the shape of a face and steam the shape of a map. Trays clattered sharp when new, thudded dull when old. Darren chose balance and set the metal down with a gentle truth at the table he already owned in angles and exits. The napkin dispenser did its tired mirror work, rewarding patience and punishing vanity. Razer held his corner like weather, unmoving, making men change shape by standing still. Spider floated in the near water, sometimes slack and sometimes taut, a rope ready to serve whichever boat gave the order. The nervous man touched pockets. He no longer trusted. Around Darren, eyes trimmed themselves, not because they feared him, because rumor had pulled a chair beside him, and no one wished to be seen sharing a bench with it. He ate the way an endurance machine takes fuel, each chew a count his body knew, grain and salt and the iron of a pan that had lived too many days. No foreign edge. He slid the spoon, the smallest measure, from his torso with his thumb, clearing the surface the way a carpenter clears a bench before work. The dispenser offered a small picture of a larger truth. A trustee leaned toward the door guard and shaped his mouth around a whisper, eager to become a rumor, and happy to be both. The younger guard followed with the eagerness that gets men invited into mistakes. Razer watched nothing and read everything. His hand rose once toward the hinge of his jaw, remembered steam and control, and dropped. Pride edited itself into calculation. Back in the dorm, Steele told Darren that something at the far end had learned to stand still. 2 new weights held their patience rather than leaking it. He checked the thread bow he had left in the sheet and found it bowed. Dust on the shelf lip lay unbroken. He set his palm to the rail and let the hum drop through bone. The map held. Escalation arrived politely. A shoulder tried for him in the aisle and met his absence. A nudge at the tray return reached for shove and failed because angles refused the gift. A voice practiced casual near his bunk and left a shy mint behind. He let the small things collect. Evidence gathers like lint. Each piece is nothing until the moment a hole is needed. Laundry offered heat and its loyal cough. The camera there still wore the neat circle of a recent wipe, a smaller crescent at the edge where a thumb had steadied eagerness. He stood a half step outside the doorway, the step that said he would not enter pockets uninvited, and memorized the art. He did not enter. The shower drain still kept its 2 white teeth. Drains hold better than hands. Harassments gathered weight but not yet shape. His clear bag returned from a search he had not been asked to witness. It lay on his mattress, sealed and accompanied by a slip that called the act routine. Routine leaves fingerprints. The crease belonged to another hand. The comb sat at the far end of the shelf, teeth still to the wall, gap unhealed. The soap halves lay aligned too neatly, edges pressed as if a fact could be erased by pressure. He lifted them once and felt refusal. He set them down at an angle only he used. A hair bridged the back corner of the cubby and settled where he placed it, ready to tell a small truth later. Spider drifted by, selling weather. "You doing all right, Thorne?" Darren looked at him for as long as speaking requires, and no longer. "Order is good," he said. Spider tried a grin and produced a shrug. He moved on, failed not to look back on the second step. Behind him, the nervous man bumped into air while rehearsing stillness. Yard pushed them through mesh that sang in only one spot. The sky lay undecided over concrete. Darren walked the edge of shadow and let his eyes do clean work. Post and gate and tower. A guard who turned on the drumbeat of habit and would turn on it again. Gravel changed voice under different weight. An empty corner proposed itself and became too useful all at once. Razer had learned to give corners to eyes, not bodies. He would try a corridor with bad light, a timing between counts, a place where noise could be borrowed. Darren put those thoughts where he stored rain gear when the forecast turned tricky. Returning to the dorm, the river thinned. Men learned a new distance from him, not respect, insurance. He entered the aisle, and the aisle moved a measure around him like water, making room for a slow boat. He pressed 2 fingers to the rail. Steele told him whisper had crouched. Metal on metal clicked in a pocket not 2 bunks away. Silence had learned to carry Razer's pride like a tool. Afternoon sharpened. Count took longer and wore a new tone. The older guard read names as if the paper worried him. The younger guard watched Razer's corner more than he watched the line. Darren stayed with small work. He adjusted a crease. He rotated the band so skin would not break. He slid the comb, one tooth, and back, so the gap could teach his finger again. He turned the soap halves by a degree and set them down wrong in a way only one pair of eyes would notice. Spider arrived when rooms like this usually ask for comic relief and cannot have it. "Keep your head down," he said. Darren met him without rising. "There is not much to see on the floor," he said. Spider let a breath out through his nose, performed a shrug for any audience that needed it, and left with steps light at the knees and heavy at the shoulders. The posture of a man carrying something he cannot safely drop. Razer spoke to the room rather than to Darren. He stood in doorways and made walking change pace. He reminded the air to get out of his way, and it obeyed. When his glance crossed Darren's row, it moved like a cold draft. Pride wanted a moment. Evidence wanted a witness that could be shaped later. He would not bring plastic teeth again. He wanted the building to hold some of the guilt. Evening let the air grow thick. Television muttered. Chest clicked. The dryer cleared its throat on time. The camera light above the door counted seconds into beads. A linen cart chattered along the corridor with less care than usual. The older guard passed the door without looking in, as he always did on the first pass, saving the surprise for the second. Darren lay back and let the red soak his vision. He listened to the bunk frame more than to the voices. New weight visited the rail and set itself down gently. The careful pressure of someone adjusting metal in the dark, whisper threads stitched between bunks. Not yet words, only the small clicks of objects wanting to be tools. The sound was not the weak scrape of plastic. It was sharp metal grazing cloth, and then the faint kiss of leather. The shiv made of milk had left the story. A heavier word had entered it. He rose at a pace that would not earn attention and walked a loop that brought him by the service alcove. The wiped circle on the lens stayed clean. No new crescent. He ghosted along the lockers. Brushed metal bent the room into a small truth. In that curve, two men stood too close for comfort and not close enough for friendship. Spider drew shapes in the air, as if drafting a device he could not build. The nervous man nodded too often. Yes. Holders stacked where a no would have been a fall. Darren returned to his bunk and let quiet be dangerous. He placed the clear bag on the mattress, like a man sets down something that cannot break because it already has. He unsealed it, pressed the crease in the slip between finger and thumb, felt his own pressure return like a recorded pulse, then set the slip down. He shifted the soap halves, one notch, a notch that would testify later, and slid the comb, a tooth, paused, slid it back. Lights did not dim so much as they let the air thicken another degree. A second count ran with fewer syllables, as if the guard wanted it finished before his feet remembered to scrape. The room settled, and in the settling the plan announced itself. 3 shadows pooled at the far end and pretended not to be a group. One leaned and yawned. One perched on a bunk edge and studied nothing. One faced away and listened behind his back. They had chosen the aisle where the camera's cone thinned, and the dryer cough arrived only as rumor. Pride and evidence had found a gap both could accept. Darren lowered his forearm and sat up. He placed bare feet on concrete and felt the stored day climb into skin. He set his hand to the rail and listened. The new weight at the far end learned the bunk language quickly, then too quickly, nerves teaching, and then rushing. He waited a breath past what patience demanded. He stood. He did not angle for the wall. He did not claim the center. He walked a lane that left him 2 exits, and no blind spot he had not chosen. The first shadow adjusted to meet him. The second Let the adjustment happen. The third waited for a signal that did not arrive on time. Spider stepped first because pride tells him generosity looks like leadership. We need a word. Thorne. Darren stopped at the exact place where a single step would be required for touch. A step for touch is a small measurement with a large meaning. At that distance, an elbow cannot borrow the torso for leverage. At that distance, a shoulder cannot turn into a thrust without exposing its root. Darren had not only avoided the punch, he had cancelled the possibility of power. He stood inside a null distance of his own choosing and let the room learn what it meant. He looked once at Spider, once at the floor where Glaze had surrendered, once at the edge of the camera's cone beyond the row. He did not smile. He did not decorate menace. He let policy stand where it had always stood. Words are better in rooms that listen, he said. Spider's mouth twitched toward humor and then toward hunger. Razer waited in the second shadow. Postura serene, eyes not. His hand hung near a pocket that kept a shape from knocking. His chin stayed level. He did not touch his jaw. He had learned that lesson. His breath slowed, as if breath could wear a plan. Darren lifted his hands a finger's width from his sides and invited silence. It came eager. Men along the row looked down, not from fear of blows, but from fear of making silence choose them. Far down the corridor, the older guard's boots scraped and paused, as if remembering this door. Razer spoke low, keeping the words inside steel. You think the room belongs to you? Rooms belong to time, Darren said. We are renters. Razer smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. Then he took the step required for touch. He had taken this step 100 times to show men where power lived. His open palm reached for cloth and met air. Fingers closed on negation. There is a moment when a body has already counted on leverage and discovers the count is false. Razer entered that moment, behind Darren. Another pair of fingers hunted ribs and found only the distance a breath uses to enter and leave. The third shadow remembered movement and brought it late, discovering that lateness also cancels force. Darren turned stillness into geometry. He gave intention small changes of path and let tile answer the rest. He did not strike. He did not even block. He set distance to 0, where power cannot grow, and let the consequences collect on their own. In 2 steps that were not steps at all, the ambush became absence. Spider's weight leaned into space and had to pretend it meant to lean. Razer's palm hung in air, a fraction longer than pride can explain. Whispers cracked and fell quiet. A bunk creaked. Far down the corridor, the guard took 2 more steps and let the drag return because performance had become unnecessary. Spider drew breath to turn failure into chaos. Razer lifted his hand a fraction to stop him and killed the noise with it, not command. A twitch disguised as leadership. He did it not because he feared the officers, but because the scene would not sell. In this thin camera cone, he did not need a win. He needed a story he could take to market. Darren had just ensured no story could be written. Darren stepped back the smallest unit that can still be called a step, and returned to his bunk without turning his back completely. The way a man leaves a counter after paying exact. His palm found the rail. Steel reported the weight of restraint across the row. The weight of men keeping hands in pockets to keep themselves from proving something too soon. He lay with his forearm over his eyes and let the red stain his lids. The room breathed around him. The camera blinked. The dryer coughed. Night drew another inch of quiet over concrete. New weight visited metal again, slower now, and pressed a secret into the frame. Cloth whispered. Then came the sound he had been waiting for. Not the weak scrape of plastic, but the small, bright ring of sharp metal against cloth, and then the softer kiss of metal against a leather shoe. The toy had left the game. A heavier tool had been invited in. He did not move. He let the bunk carry the news into bone. He did not need to see their faces to read the next line. Isolation had become a fence. The room itself had built around him. A fence Razer could not break. Without making a noise, the guards would understand. That left fewer choices and sharper ones. Not respect, not another lesson, not a plastic test. The pressure ladder had one rung left before the high place, where evidence turns into theater. Movement arrived dressed as routine. A voice at the door called inspection with the even tone used for things that happen every day. Ons visible. No stray talk. The dorm slid into a river that denied hurry and denied delay. Steel under Darren's palm gave him what the room would not say aloud. New weight at the far row carried itself careful and excited. A bad mix. The diode over the door blinked its duty beat. He matched one breath to it, and then returned the timing to himself. He rose with the first wave and joined where a wall lived to his left, and a pillar waited ahead. He did not front the line. He did not close it. He chose the lane that left him 2 exits and gave blind corners to someone else. Spider's steps brushed the current and kept testing distance. The nervous man behind Spider tapped his pockets like a man counting ghosts he could not comfort. Razer let his corner move with him. Gravity on legs. Space deciding to get out of his way. The corridor smelled of damp cotton and hot metal that had learned to swallow complaint. The dryer down the wing coughed where it always coughed. The camera above the threshold blinked on tempo and did not care about faces. Ahead, the first sally port showed its glass window, and the arch that listened for metal. The arch did not love anyone here. It liked being right. The gate buzzed, opened, and the river flowed. Darren took the booth glass into his eyes without turning his head. In the reflection he mapped what mattered. The arch's red eye, the tray of plastic bins where men surrendered thin possessions, the table with the wand already humming its bored song, the logbook, its ruled lines waiting for names and times and initials. A clear bag sat on the counter from earlier, marker across its top. The ink had dried into a gloss, device-sized, time in letters, not numbers. The faint ghost of a lock icon slept under plastic when light struck just so. That was a threat written in a language the building trusted. Darren let the line carry him forward. He eased the plastic wristband a fraction on his skin so it would not stick when heat climbed. Spider floated near and then away, measuring lanes with appetite. Razer held a few bodies back by design. He liked to watch men do his work and then choose his own entrance. The arch declared the first men harmless with silence. The wand skimmed a belt buckle, a cuff snap, a zipper that hid nothing. A bin clacked, a pen squeaked in the log. 1 step, 2, 3. Harmless found its rhythm, and men trusted it. Darren reached a bin and set down his clear bag. With the soap halves still refusing union and the comb with its familiar gap, he did not have to. He chose to. He spread his fingers and showed the bored wand empty palm. He stepped through the arch, and the arch did not speak. The floor held him. The camera blinked. The booth watched. He moved 1 step past the arch and made a small adjustment that no one had been taught to notice. He shifted his stance by a thumb's width, a harmless correction to anyone else, but enough to narrow the lane just where the arch wanted ownership. He did not touch Razer. He did not need to. He recalculated Razer's velocity and weight and used the floor to slide a target 1 notch into the machine's most honest listening. Spider took the arch next with a practiced swing, and the grin he kept for trade. Silence accepted him. The wand hummed. Bored, he passed and posted himself where he could watch and pretend not to. The nervous man followed and tried to be air. He plucked pockets like strings and made no music. Shoes squeaked. Breath stayed shallow. The arch let him pass, and the wand skimmed him like a hand over still water. Relief found him without happiness. Kicking the can only moves the can. Razer stepped up without looking at the arch, because men like him prefer to pretend rules live elsewhere. He set his hands on a bin and did not let the fingers open all the way. Leather at his shoe whispered under a weight change. Metal made a small, bright sound against cloth, and then went still the way a held breath goes still. Darren's thumb's width nudge had done its work. The lane had tightened exactly where it mattered. Razer stepped, and the arch took him in until it did not. The red eye woke, and the tone spoke. Not a scream, a calm certainty. The river stopped like an animal listening for weather. Heads turned without moving. The wand guard straightened into his job. The older guard's drag returned to his step, as if authority had reminded the boot who it was. Air gathered weight. Razer lifted his chin the smallest measure and smoothed his face. His hands arranged themselves, not surrender. Pose. He tried to look like a man interrupted by nonsense. He began to step back. The booth guard raised a palm. Stop. A second officer came from the table with the wand already singing. Another took position behind Razer to make a thinking wall. The wand breathed over shoulders and sleeves, and then found what it had been waiting for. It sang at the waistline and the pocket near it. It sang again at the shoe where leather held a secret. Empty, the guard said, the voice of a rule that expects its own obedience. Razer opened his hands with courtesy big enough for men to see and small enough to say, "This is beneath me." Nothing from one pocket, nothing from another. The wand waited at the shoe. Razer hesitated half a breath, and then bent his knee, like a man kneeling for a prayer he does not believe in. A sliver of metal kissed light, not long, not crude, wrapped handle taught to obey cloth. The arch hushed, as if courtesy demanded silence while evidence spoke. Razer held the sliver between two fingers like an object he had just now discovered and wished to disown. The younger guard did not take it from his hand. He pointed at the table. There. The word made space. Razer set the metal down with careful contempt. The guard did not touch it. He called for the clear bag already waiting. Plastic uncurled with a soft foil sigh. The older guard uncapped a thick marker and wrote the header on the seal. The squeak of felt on plastic drew a line even the back of the river could hear. Weapon recovered. He wrote the place. He wrote the hour in letters and the day in long language. He wrote his initials with the hand of a man who has done this too many times. The younger guard lifted the bag open by its edges, as if stories lived on surfaces, and he did not want any of them on him. He slid the metal inside without letting flesh meet it. The seal pressed closed with the neat sound that ends arguments. He turned the bag so the room could see. Inside, the weapon looked smaller and official. The wrapped handle pressed shapes into clear skin. The red eye went to sleep. The logbook moved. The pen made a tidy line. Darren kept his face the same. Not triumph, not surprise. Calm that refuses to argue. He felt the concrete through shoe. The camera's steady blink at the edge of sight. The air stir across the back of his neck as men behind him changed how they stood. In the booth glass he watched without watching. Razer's mouth did not tighten. That would admit. His eyes did not widen. That would concede. Two fingers rose to his own neck for the time it takes a hand to test a hinge, and then fell as if the hand had been thinking of something else. That reflex was a confession only steel could read. Twice now he had been corrected. Once by geometry, without touch. Once by a rule that required only a thumb's width of nudge. The older guard dated the seal again and drew his initials over the join so opening would shout later. He set the bag beside the earlier bag with the phone. the lock icon still sleeping under plastic. When light hit it, the two sat together in symmetry, evidence paired like a story that had learned to speak in the language the building understood. First the screen, then the metal. Rumor had acquired a backbone. The younger guard guided Razer to the side wall, hands on paint. Fade back. The search that followed was not a punishment. It was cadence. He kept the beat and finished it. Razer obeyed with the impatience of a man who believes instruction is for others. He did not look left. He did not look right. He did not look at Darren. Refusal to see is a kind of plea in a room that prefers paperwork. The line moved again because the world is rude. It does not pause for pride to repair its face. Darren collected his clear bag, the soap halves still wrong together, the comb's gap intact. He did not loiter. He did not hurry. He set a palm lightly on the arch, as if steadying himself, and did not leave a print because the contact had never been pressure. They were fanned into the multi-use room, benches facing a bulletin board that rarely told any good news. A clock hung crooked above a poster that asked men to believe in plans. The walls trapped sound, and then let it go late. A metal table waited like a witness that remembers every set of hands. Darren chose a bench where the hinge of the door and the edge of the camera cone both lived inside his frame. Spider and the nervous man chose distance and then chose more. They did not wait for Razer. The nervous man's fear had turned its face away from the boss and toward the system that now held his phone in a labeled skin. The group had begun to decay along an axis no punch could mend. Razer arrived last because gravity must have an entrance. He stood, instead of sitting, breath at the speed of a man doing a favor for breathing. He looked not at the table, not at the bags, but at the air above them where some men believe better versions of events may live. His hand started toward a cuff that did not need adjusting, and stopped because hands tell stories, and he had spent all of his on the wrong pages today. A supervisor in a gray shirt with a pen pocket entered with a clipboard that made the room listen. He had the tired authority of a man who knows procedures cannot heal, but can keep things from bleeding. Items recovered. Documentation complete. Placement pending. He did not say segregation. Plastic said it for him, quieter and louder at once. Any claim, any context, any statement to add. The question required by rule met silence required by survival. He wrote a line for each no. Marker squeaked. Ink dried. The bags were logged again. Number to number, letter to name, place to place. Chain did its work. Darren watched the bulletin board's glass give him small truths reversed. Spider told himself something he would not put in the air. The nervous man measured the space near Razer and chose a seat a hand farther away than yesterday. Information had isolated Razer more perfectly than fists ever could. He was disarmed in metal and alone in rumor. He belonged to the record now. A door at the back opened and let cooler hall and old coffee into the room. The older guard carried the two bags with careful elbows and left with steps measured, the clipboard left with the supervisor. The room lost a certain kind of weight. Razer's shoulders rose by a fraction and then refused to be seen lowering. Spider unclenched his jaw. The nervous man rubbed his palms against his pants, as if dust had gathered there. Orders moved them back toward the dorm. The river formed. Darren entered where a wall lived to his left and a pillar ahead. He kept calm on his face and availability in his body for anything the building might ask. Back in the dorm, television blue-washed faces and then withdrew. Chess plastic clicked once and thought better of it. Steel, under Darren's palm, put the hour into one report. The far row weighed lighter. Patience changed shape. The frame carried the memory of a group that had stood careful, done nothing, and believed that doing nothing had value. It sometimes does. Not today. He checked his shelf without checking. Paper flat, soap halves wrong together in the way only he recognized. Comb gap where it lived. He pressed the clear bag to the mattress to wrinkle it as if it had only ever held air. He lay back with his forearm over his eyes and let red bleed into private dusk. The diode blinked. He matched a breath and let it go. He considered the shape of the day and filed it without garnish. The arch had spoken when it needed to, and only then. Plastic had zipped. Marker had squeaked. Ink had dried into chain. The phone bag had found a twin. Symmetry had cut deeper than any blade. Spider had drifted toward distance. The nervous man had turned his fear to the system. Razer had kept his eyes away because looking is a kind of confession. He listened to the bunk rail more than to men. New weight visited the far row and tried to set a secret into metal. Metal kept the secret and handed Darren the sound of it anyway. A small bright ring of sharp metal grazed cloth and tapped leather farther away this time. Practiced, patient, heavier than plastic. He learned the distance, he learned the rhythm. He did not move. He let quiet do the speaking. He kept the chain of small facts where he always kept it, behind the eyes and under the breath. A wiped circle on a lens, a drain with 2 white teeth, an arch that sang for iron, 2 bags that sealed in symmetry, a supervisor whose handwriting the building trusts. Precision had done the damage, and silence had carried it. The story had stepped from rumor into record. The next scene would not forgive anyone who had not been listening. Morning consented instead of arriving. The dorm stirred in layered quiet. Breath first, then the soft edits of bodies agreeing with the day. Steel under Darren's palm translated the room into facts. Fear stepped forward on the front of the feet. Arrogance landed with less heel than yesterday. The older guard tried for smooth, and the scrape confessed itself halfway through the stride. The diode over the door blinked its patient beat. Darren matched one breath to it, and then returned his lungs to their own tempo. He checked the shelf without checking. Paper flat. Comb where the gap lived. Soap halves still refusing union. He turned the plastic band at his wrist, a fraction to keep skin honest, and let the river make him a place as it called itself a line. The corridor wore damp cotton and hot metal for scent. Down the wing, the dryer kept its loyal cough. The camera above the threshold blinked as if the building were taking a pulse. Darren drifted where a wall lived to his left, and a pillar waited ahead. Razer's weather entered later, and the river parted without being asked. Spider floated between currents, slack and taut by turns. The nervous man moved like air that had learned nerves. Routine declared itself with the even tone that makes trouble look like paperwork. Inspection and inventory. The Sallyport's arch slept today. The river angled toward the multi-use room where benches faced a bulletin board that rarely delivered good news. A convex mirror rode one corner, a dome lens above the door, a clock that enjoyed being right, and a metal table that remembered hands. Procedures prefer rooms that already speak their language. Darren stepped through the doorway at a pace the line accepted. A draft from the hall slid past his neck and retreated. The dome lens was clean and honest. The mirror swallowed the room and gave it back warped, a curve that punished vanity and rewarded patience. He chose the bench that kept the door hinge and the mirror inside his frame, while the camera's cone rested just off his shoulder. He did not appear to choose. He let the room choose him. The supervisor in gray returned with a clipboard that made the air hold its breath. The radio at his shoulder coughed, and then remembered manners. Items check and schedule updates. Hands clear, eyes front. On the counter, a clear bag from yesterday sat with marker dried into gloss. Its twin rested beside it, screen and metal. The house had learned the story. and had written it in its own hand. Names were called and signed. The older guard's drag confessed itself between signatures. The logbook ate ink neatly. Spider's name climbed the page. The nervous man pressed too hard. The pen blotted, and he pretended it had not. Razer watched the air above the evidence counter, the spot where some men file better versions of events. Darren signed with a steady hand and returned the pen in the direction it came. He sat and set stillness down as a craftsman sets a level. He counted the ways the room could be turned against itself and chose the one that needed the least work. He did not need force. He needed a story the building could tell. Razer moved when the river offered him center space. He did not take a bench. He stood in the aisle between benches and counter, a foot angled to keep a path to the door. He liked exits that believed they were secrets. Spider planted himself where a step could become help or harm on command. The nervous man held the end of a bench like a railing in a slow storm. The supervisor spoke duties and times and turned to the bags and the log. The younger guard played hinge and witness at the door. The older guard touched the radio and asked the clock to remember. Darren rose as if to stretch a silent cramp and stepped into the aisle. He shifted his stance by a thumb's width, harmless to any eye without practice. An edit that narrowed the lane between Razer and the counter, forcing a body to brush the bench or brush the table where the house kept pens and receipts. Precision is power when rooms are made of rules. Razer read nuisance, not threat. Pride told his feet he owned the middle. He took the step that had always sold ownership. He came close, palm lowered, to make space. Pay attention. Fingers half spread in the old language of, "Show me your place." The palm met air. Elbow found no lever. Shoulder lacked room to turn into shove. Darren had set a null distance, a measurement that cancels force before it is born. Razer's jaw flexed once and stopped, as if a hand remembered steam. The mask returned, fixed and patient. He pivoted on Pride's heel and reached not for Darren but for the table with the logbook, the pen, the bags. The move said, "I will tidy what the room makes." It also said, "I will put my hand near what the house now owns and pretend it still belongs to me." Darren did not interfere. He gave a small inch that looked like courtesy and was design. The inch borrowed path from Razer and slid it nearer the counter, nearer the clear plastic, nearer the clipboard that answers to a desk, that answers to a file, that answers to a screen. Spider floated in as men do when told to save a moment. He lifted an elbow ready to knit bodies into confusion. Darren turned a single degree, and the elbow moved through a space that had just ceased to exist. Spider had to pretend he had meant to catch nothing. The nervous man breathed in short lengths and found no comfort. He looked up at the convex mirror and saw himself small and true, and that hurt more than fear. Razer reached for the pen and found it without asking. He lifted it as if writing could mend a day. His other hand moved near the bag's gloss. Not a touch, an orbit. The gesture said the bag should not have had anything to say. The dome lens watched. The mirror punished the angle. The camera's cone ended just beyond Darren's shoulder. To reach his prop, Razer had stepped inside the frame. Darren breathed once and let the breath go. He moved his shoe the distance. A coin flips when asked to show head. The toe kissed the table leg with a schoolroom sound. The table answered by a fraction. Razer's hand adjusted by that same fraction and drifted into the space where the seal joined plastic. The older guard looked up. Tables do not speak unless asked, and this one had just spoken politely. Razer's palm hovered over the seal and paused. Pride asked for the bag, so it could scold it for existing. The pause grew. The supervisor turned his head and saw a hand where a hand did not belong. The radio at the door coughed at the wrong time. The clock did the trick clocks do when men need help, and became unmistakably present. Razer chose wrong because pride promised silence later. He pinched plastic to move it, just enough to say ownership inside his own skull. The squeak from the bag was small and too clear. It carried like a marker on plastic, thin and absolute. The supervisor did not raise his voice. Hands off evidence. Razer let go at once, hoping to call it reflex. The pen, in his other hand, needed something to do. He turned it without thinking, and the tip clicked across the seal. It did not break the join, but it spoke in a language the building does not forgive. The younger guard stepped in with the wand humming, though no arch lived here. Ritual steadies hands. The older guard lifted a new clear bag and uncapped the marker with a sound that named the outcome. Spider stepped back and would later call it prudence. The nervous man stared at his palms as if crime might be blooming there. Darren did not smile. He kept witness distance. Stillness does good work in rooms built for procedure. The supervisor took the pen from Razer with 2 fingers on edges and placed it on the table like a small animal. He looked at the seal, then at the lens, letting the room confirm what it had learned. Rebag and note contact. The older guard slid the bag into a second skin and sealed it, then wrote the words, "The house enjoys underlining, chain, maintained, seal observed, contact recorded." The marker squeaked in neat, long strokes. The clock watched. The mirror punished every angle. Razer's posture did not break. Breath again behaved as a favor. He did not look at Darren. Refusal to see is a plea the room understands. 2 fingers rose to his own neck. A quick test at the hinge, then fell. Twice now he had been corrected, once by geometry, without touch, once by a rule that answered to plastic and ink. Spider felt the change, and could not pretend he did not. He looked at Razer, then at the clipboard, then back. He knew which side of the page would outlast faces. The nervous man slid down the bench by a hand's width. Nobody had authorized and learned how much grace a single hand's width can carry. The older guard lifted both bags with elbows near and left through the back door. The labels faced the room as they passed and told a completed thesis in 3 lines. Device sized, weapon recovered, contact recorded. The house had said its argument in clear skin and black ink. Procedure had become Darren's quiet weapon. The multi-use room exhaled after the clipboard left. Razer did not move for a beat. He turned then, not toward Darren, not toward the aisle, but toward the convex mirror that had been telling hard truths all morning. He squared himself to the warped oval and met a bent version of his own face. He chose not to recognize it. Power in his head had been straight line. The mirror gave him curves. It was not Darren that bent him. It was the clock, and the plastic, and the handwriting the building trusts. Orders washed them toward the dorm. The river reassembled. Darren entered where a wall lived to his left, and a pillar ahead. Calm sat on his face with nothing extra. The corridor breathed cooler air from doors opened and closed with purpose. The camera blinked and refused to pick favorites. In the dorm, blue light tried on faces and gave up. Chess plastic clicked once and decided against existence. Steel folded the hour into one report beneath Darren's palm. The far row's weight was lighter and more brittle, the kind that snaps. The frame kept the memory of men who had stood near evidence and learned what near means. He checked the shelf without checking. Paper flat, comb gap where it belonged, soap halves wrong together. He pressed the clear bag on the mattress to wrinkle it as if it had only ever held air. He lay back with his forearm over his eyes and let red bleed into private dusk. The diode blinked. He matched a breath and let it go. He considered the day in the house's grammar and filed it. First the screen, then the metal, then a seal kissed by a pen. 2 bags, seated in symmetry like an official thesis on failure. A thumb's width had narrowed a lane, and the room had done the rest. He had not touched Razer. He had adjusted the room. Procedure had carried the blade. Spider did not drift by with weather for sale. He kept distance and practiced, believing it had been his idea. The nervous man studied his hands with the obedience of someone who knows paper will want them later. Razer held his corner and let it hold him. He would not look at Darren. Looking writes a sentence in ink even pride can read. The bunk frame learned a new secret and delivered it. A small bright ring of sharp metal grazed cloth at the far end and kissed leather. The note had moved farther and grown patient. The plastic shiv had been a test. The metal shiv had been confiscated. The sound now belonged to something heavier and darker, not built to threaten, built to make blood evidence where the camera could not see. Darren did not move. He let quiet carry the tune. He kept the chain of small facts where he stores weight, a wipe circle on a lens, a drain that swallowed 2 white teeth, an arch that sang for iron, 2 bags seated in symmetry, a seal recorded for contact, a mirror that refuses to flatter, a clock that likes to be right. Spider glancing at the clipboard and understanding who rules the room, Razer choosing not to recognize his own curve. The story had stepped from rumor into record. The next scene would not forgive anyone who had not been listening. Night settled like a lid on a jar. The dorm thinned its sounds until air seemed to hold them in a careful hand. Steel under Darren's palm translated the room into truths he trusted. Fear still tried the fronts of feet. Arrogance rehearsed heel, reconsidered, and chose not to land. The old drag toyed with the guard's step, and then remembered to be quiet. The diode over the door blinked its patient beat. Darren matched one breath to it, and then returned the rhythm to his own keeping. He checked the shelf without checking. Paper flat. The comb where the gap lived. A gap. The pad of a finger knew better than sight. Soap halves wrong together. In the way only he recognized. He turned the plastic band at his wrist a fraction so the skin beneath stayed honest. He let the bunk frame talk to bone. Far down the row, cloth whispered to metal and asked it to wait. Leather kept a secret in the patient way leather can. He lay with his forearm over his eyes and let red light soak his lids into private dusk. He did not invite sleep. He waited for the building to clear its throat. A count passed like a soft broom. Bristles up. No noise wasted. Keys walked themselves into discretion. The camera blinked its duty into the corner of sight. The dryer offered its loyal cough at the exact place in its wheel. The note he could set his time by, and never would. A whisper tried to gather at the end of the row. Not words yet, only the delicate clicks tools make when they want to be called something else. On the second click, he sat up and tied his sheet corner tighter, with a quiet knot that would look like habit at dawn. He stood when the bunk frame told him it was time, and walked the lane that gave him 2 exits, and gave blind corners to someone else. He carried nothing. He did not hurry. He let the building do the pacing. The aisle he chose belonged to bad light and borrowed noise. The camera's cone thinned here, not absent, only tired. The cough of the dryer arrived as rumor. The floor kept a patch of worn glaze where turning had been common for years. He took a post, a small step beyond that patch, and adjusted his stance by the width of a thumb, small enough to be accident, large enough to change an ending. Weight arrived careful and excited, a bad mix. Spider's steps came quick at the knees and heavy at the shoulders. The carriage of a man picking up a decision he had dropped twice. The nervous man breathed in short lengths that stacked and toppled and stacked again. Razor's weather did not stride. It pressed. Air learned to move aside. Darren let his hands hang at his sides, palms quiet. He did not look at the pocket where metal slept. He watched a seam in the cinder block, a line no one cared about, and was ready to stop watching the instant someone else cared. The bunk frame under his palm hummed when a hand rested on it in the far row. That hand did not belong to patience. It belonged to purpose. Razer entered the thin light and brought his silence with him. Spider floated 3 paces off his right, too close for honesty, too far for courage. The nervous man hovered behind and watched his own hands as if they had become witnesses. No one spoke. Words would have given the room a right it had not demanded. Darren stepped half a measure forward into the lane and stopped at the place that requires a single step for touch. Null distance. At that measure, an elbow cannot borrow the torso. At that measure, a shoulder cannot turn into a thrust without naming its point of birth. He cancelled power before power could be born. He set his heel on the seam between tiles that never agreed with each other, and let that seam be his hinge. Razer lifted his chin a degree and arranged permission on his mouth. His left hand stayed plain. His right hand thought it was hidden. He used the step that had sold ownership for years. His palm reached for cloth and met air. Fingers closed on negation. Behind the gesture, the heavier promise moved. The one Darren had been hearing for nights, the bright ring against cloth, and the soft kiss against leather. A darker tool wanted a theater. Darren did not reach for him. He turned his torso the length of a breath and let momentum pass into the worn glaze where turns go to die. The foot that had counted on friction found a plane. Pride corrected. Pride is nimble until it is not. The heavier promise came from the pocket at the wrong angle for the wrong lane. A small blade would have owned that angle. This tool belonged to the world beyond shivs. It sounded like something a kitchen respects and a bone believes. Metal met air and called to it. Air answered with a thin note. Darren moved a finger's width and let the arc seek a target that no longer lived where it had planned. The arc kissed the bunk rail instead. A sharp, clean note no lens could see, but every wall could keep. Sparks tried for theater and settled for truth. Spider flinched and pretended he had sneezed. Now voice rose. It did not need to. Rooms like this always hear when metal speaks their language. The old drag forgot to hide and hurried down the corridor. A radio coughed and learned urgency. The camera blinked a little faster, though it had no right to. Darren did not move into the space. He moved out of it and left a path so procedure could enter without embarrassment. Razer tried to fold the larger truth back into pocket and failed. The edge had tasted rail and did not want cloth. Pride would not rehearse again. Pride reached for rage. Velocity tried to replace authority. The line rose, short and mean, a strike that could have broken a face if a face had been there. It met the pillar that belonged to the building and learned what stone can teach. The note climbed and fractured. Hate kept the grip one heartbeat longer than physics would allow. Darren held the sliver of the camera's cone he had measured by afternoon light. He did not shout. He did not plead. He did not move toward justice. He positioned it and let it arrive. Spider made the sound men make when they want chaos to cover their choices. The nervous man made the sound men make when they understand they have been traveling inside a story headed for a wall. The old drag arrived and scraped once, and then stopped. A younger pair of boots followed with 3 quick steps, and a careful fourth. Hands rose by command rather than choice. The voice did not need to shout. Razer stalled a sliver too long, and the room collected debt with interest. The younger guard spoke past the man to the object. Drop. The building loves that verb. Metal hit tile and tried to bounce proud. It failed. The sound had a syllable and an echo, small enough for paperwork. A clear bag was asked for, and arrived from a belt that knows itself. Plastic opened with a whisper like a page accepting a signature. The older guard pointed to the floor, and the place between tiles that never agreed. There, the word made a container. The younger guard used it. Gloves performed their ritual. Edges were respected. Plastic became skin and then became chain. The marker uncapped with its thin, absolute squeak and wrote the lines the house keeps. Weapon recovered. Place stated in long language. Day given its full name. Hour spelled so memory cannot cheat. Initials recorded with slow care. The camera watched ink turn into authority. Razer did not look at Darren. He looked around him and through him at an air that refused persuasion. His jaw moved once, and then remembered not to. 2 fingers rose to his neck. A hinge test that had become reflex, then fell. Spider read the clipboard and understood what pride refuses to teach. The nervous man discovered he had drifted a hand's width away from his boss and did not move back. The older guard touched the scratched rail with a glove as if teaching the glove what to remember. Contact noted, he said to the pen. The pen listened. The room now held 4 neat truths. A thesis written in clear skin and black ink. Screen confessed. Iron confessed. Seal confessed. Contact confessed. Procedure had cut deeper than any blade. When the supervisor in gray entered with the clipboard that makes air listen, the scene already belonged to the house. The search that followed was cadence, not punishment. It found nothing new. It did not need to. The new bag received date and initials. The door beyond the door learned a quiet word the supervisor did not speak. Placement. Darren stayed where the cone could claim him, and where the hinge could see his posture. He did not collect the moment. He let the building hold it. He drew a breath and tasted that metallic edge rooms get when discipline is hotter than air. He let the breath go and kept his hands still enough for a lens to draw them without lifting its pen. Order moved, like water downhill. Razer went first between escorts who do not negotiate pace. Spider did not wait. The nervous man did not try to follow. Distance learned honesty. The corridor smelled faintly of coffee that had been made for someone else. The radio wrote its little sentences onto the day. Back in the dorm, television blue thought better of faces. Chess. Plastic. Chose silence over a move. Steel under Darren's palm folded the hour into one report. The far row weighed less and sharper, the kind of light that snaps. The frame kept a fresh memory of a rail that had sung in the wrong key and had agreed to testify. He checked the shelf without checking. Paper flat, comb gap where it belongs, soap halves wrong together. He pressed the empty evidence bag on the mattress until it wrinkled into a forgettable thing. Then he sat and let quiet finish what it had started. Quiet has hands when you let it. He turned the day into a ledger, in the only place that could keep it safe. He thought in symmetry, left and right, loss and receipt. On the left, he set the things Razer had meant to own. On the right, he set the lines the house had written to keep them. On the left, the plastic shiv that had tried to be a blade. On the right, a drain that swallowed its 2 pale teeth and kept their absence as proof. On the left, the heavier iron meant for a face. On the right, a seal and a label and ink that will not forgive. On the left, a face that once sold ownership by posture. On the right, a convex mirror bending that face until even pride could not recognize it. On the left, a hand that had pinched plastic to make it obey. On the right, a second skin over the first, and a line that read contact, recorded. On the left, the blood evidence he had wanted to write. On the right, a scratch on steel that would outlive him, loud as a signature no one had asked for, and everyone could read. He did not smile. He stood once and walked the aisle that had almost become theater. He placed his hand on the bunk rail where the blade had sung, and felt the scratch pride had left behind. He did not thank it. He pressed his thumb into the shallow bite, and held pressure long enough to learn its depth. This was a signature Razer had signed on a contract he never meant to see. Darren memorized the cut the way he memorized tempos and angles. Receipts that are not paper live longer. He returned to his bunk and folded stillness over himself. As a man folds a coat over a chair he does not expect to keep. He let the building pray its small prayers, the hum of a light, the sigh of a vent, a door catching and settling. He kept the ledger close and left it neat. On the left, the want. On the right, the record. The right was heavier now. It would stay heavy long after breath had forgotten name. Men here like endings that make noise. He did not. He chose an ending the building would understand. An ending written in the language of clocks and plastic, and the handwriting of tired authority. He let the day sign itself. With the tools that had built it, he let ink dry colder than blood. He let the audience be wires and walls, and a camera that does not ask for applause. Final image. Justice signed in cold ink. Every story about injustice is, at its core, a story about silence, and the courage it takes to break it. Darren's quiet defiance reminds us that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it counts, measures, and waits until truth speaks for itself. His victory wasn't loud or dramatic. It was procedural, deliberate, and irrevocable. It shows that integrity is not weakness and patience is not surrender. Real strength lies in restraint, in knowing when to act, how to document, and how to let evidence, not anger, speak your truth. In life, we all face systems, workplaces, families, institutions, where power bends perception. Sometimes fairness seems buried under hierarchy or noise. Yet as the old saying goes, truth doesn't rust. Like Darren, we can learn to hold our ground quietly, to build our own record through consistency and self-respect, until justice reveals itself through our actions. Breaking silence isn't always about confrontation. It's about refusing to let wrongdoing define your story. This tale is a mirror for anyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside. It reminds us that even in the most rigid structures, moral courage can find its way through procedure and persistence. The fight for dignity begins not with rage, but with awareness, preparation, and faith in one's own worth. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where silence felt safer than truth? Share your thoughts or your own story below. I'd love to hear how you found your way through. If this message resonated, give it a like, and subscribe for more stories that dig deep into the human spirit. May your next quiet moment be one of peace, not fear. May you find strength not in noise, but in clarity and the courage to let truth speak, even softly.